Have you ever really thought about what it means when someone says a sound is, I don't know, 80 decibels? Or how on earth a hearing test can measure one ear without the other one listening in? Well, today we are going to decode the language of sound. We're going to jump right into the fascinating science of how we hear and, more importantly, how we measure it.
So let's kick things off with a question that sounds, well, almost impossible. Just picture the quietest whisper you can imagine, and then picture the earth-shattering roar of a rocket launch. I mean, the difference in sheer power is just astronomical. So how in the world you create a single logical scale to measure both of those things? That is the exact puzzle that the science of acoustics was designed to solve.
To even start to answer that, we have to get back to basics. What is sound? It's not magic, it's physics. When something vibrates, say a guitar string, it sends out these little ripples of energy through the air. You can think of it like dropping a pebble into a pond. These ripples are just waves of air molecules getting squeezed together and then pulled apart, traveling all the way from that guitar string right to your eardrum. It's this very real physical wave that we're about to measure. Okay, so we know what sound is. Now let's break it down. Every single sound you've ever heard, whether it's a tiny bird chirping or a massive bass drum, it really only has two main ingredients. It has a pitch, how high or low it sounds, and it has a loudness, how quiet or intense it feels. Pitch is all about speed. We call it frequency. It's simply how fast that sound wave is vibrating, and we measure it in hertz. So the faster the vibration, the higher the pitch we hear, like a flute. On the other side, you've got loudness, and that's all about pure power or intensity. It's the force behind that sound wave. The more intense the wave, the louder the sound seems to us, just like that big bass drum. Let's dive a little deeper into frequency because it's pretty cool to see what our ears actually focus on. While we can technically hear this massive range of frequencies, hearing tests really zero in on a much smaller, more critical slice of that. And why is that? Well, because that's where human speech lives. A simple beep in a hearing test, that's what's called a pure tone. But a human voice, or a piece of music, that's a beautiful, complex mix of tons of frequencies all happening at the same time. Okay, so we've got pitch handled, but what about loudness? Let's get back to our whisper and rocket problem. The answer, the solution, is this absolutely brilliant invention called the decibel scale. And it's how we bring some much-needed order to the chaos of sound intensity. And right here, this is the single most important thing to get about decibels. It is not a unit of measurement, like an inch or a pound. You can't hold a decibel in your hand. A decibel is a ratio. It's just a really clever way of comparing the sound you're hearing to a fixed reference point. And that one simple idea is what makes it so incredibly powerful. This table shows you exactly why we need it. I mean, just look at the raw sound pressure numbers on the left. They're enormous. They have all these zeros and they're just a pain to work with. But the decibel scale, it brilliantly squishes this gigantic range into a simple, way more manageable scale, like 0 to 120. It literally turns an accounting nightmare into something that makes sense. So let's put some real-world context to this. A quiet whisper, that's around 30 decibels. My voice right now, just talking normally, is probably hitting somewhere around 60 decibels. And a shout, that's way up there at 90. See? When you connect these numbers to sounds we all hear every day, the decibel scale starts being this abstract concept and starts to feel, well, perfectly intuitive.
All right, now that we have a scale, let's look at how it's actually used in a hearing test. One of the biggest hurdles for an audiologist is that sound doesn't just go in one ear. If you play a sound for your right ear, it can actually travel right through your skull and be heard by your left ear. So how do they get around that problem and test each ear all by itself?
The solution is this really clever technique called masking. And it's a concept you're already familiar with. It's kind of like when you turn on a fan in your room to drown out a distracting noise from down the hall. In a hearing test, audiologists use a very specific, controlled noise to basically keep one ear busy so they can get a clean, accurate reading from the other one. The whole process is really straightforward and pretty brilliant. To stop that sound from leaking across your head, they play a gentle masking noise. It sounds kind of like static or a whoosh into the ear that is not being tested. And this lets them get a super precise, super accurate measurement of each ear's true individual hearing ability. No cheating allowed. So we've got frequency, we've got decibels, and now we've got masking. Let's pull all these ideas together and finally understand the specific language that audiologists use to describe what you can hear. Okay, the starting point for any hearing test is something called audiometric zero. And this is really important. 0 decibels on a hearing test
does not mean the complete absence of sound. Not at all. Instead, it represents the scientifically agreed upon average for the quietest sound a group of young people with perfect hearing can just barely detect. Think of it as the official starting line that everyone gets compared against.
And this is where it all gets personal. Hearing level, or HL, compares your hearing to that average norm we just talked about. But sensation level, or SL, that's all about you. It measures how loud a sound is relative to your own unique hearing ability. So, for example, if the quietest sound you can hear is 20 dB HL, then a sound played at 30 dB HL is just 10 decibels above your personal sensation level. This quote just explains it perfectly. Sensation level is basically a personalized volume knob, right? If I tell you to turn up your stereo by 5 clicks, what that actually sounds like completely depends on where the volume was set to begin with. Sensation level works the exact same way. It is always, always relative to your own personal starting point. Let's make this even more real. Let's say your personal hearing threshold, the quietest sound you can possibly hear, is at 20 decibels. If an audiologist then plays a sound for you at 40 dB sensation level, that means the sound is actually being played at a total of 60 decibels. And this kind of personalized measurement is absolutely essential for things like programming a hearing aid, making sure it's perfectly tailored for you, never too loud and never too quiet.
All right, let's do a quick recap of everything. We've learned that every sound has a frequency that gives it its pitch and an intensity that gives it its loudness. We saw how that incredible decibel scale makes it possible to measure a mind-boggling range of sounds. We learned about masking, that clever little trick used to test each ear all by itself. And finally, we saw the huge difference between hearing level, which compares you to an average, and sensation level, which is all about your own personal hearing.
So you now have the basic tools to understand and talk about the world of sound in a completely new way. So I'll leave you with this little challenge. The next time you're just out walking around, I want you to really listen. Now that you speak the language, what new details are you going to notice? What will you hear that you never really truly heard before? Thanks so much for tuning in.